Among the volley of crimes lauded against the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, top of the list might very well be their persistent dismissal of comedy. While a handful of films have broken through, there seems to be a small set of criteria. It must be a dramedy with serious overtones, or a musical with comic undertones. Or the circumstances must lean on what is happening in the career of the star or the filmmaker at the time. By that, one might be tempted to assume that the Academy voters would know a good comedy if it fell on them. I think it's more a question of degree. Since there are so many different shades of comedy, there's a long-standing debate about exactly how many Best Picture winners are actually comedies. For my personal book, the list includes 2 Frank Capra confections, 1934's It Happened One Night, and 1938's You Can't Take It With You, the 1944 Bing Crosby musical Going My Way, Billy Wilder's sad sack melodramedy The Apartment from 1960, the 1963 adaptation of Henry Fielding's ribald farce Tom Jones, Woody Allen's inventive 1977 rom-com Annie Hall, and most recently Tom Stoppard and Mark Norman's 1998 period comedy Shakespeare in Love. The rest are kind of in a gray area. As you can see, balls-out comedies don't usually make the grade as a Best Picture winner. No top award for Chaplin City Lights or Modern Times. No top prize given to The Thin Man, Bringing Up Baby, The Bank Dick, The Court Jester, The Odd Couple, Young Frankenstein, Blazing Saddles, Airplane, The Blues Brothers, Ghostbusters, This Is Spinal Tap, National Lampoon's Animal House, The In-Laws, Life of Brian, Trading Places, Groundhog Day, Fargo, The Birdcage, Ed Wood, Being John Malkovich, Best in Show, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, Booksmart. Yeah, these movies might have generated nods elsewhere, but few even reached the final heat for Best Picture. Heavy drama seemed to be the beck and call, appearing more important, more dignified. Those few comedies that have won are films that came along at the right time, had the right elements, the right ingredients to speak to the moment. That is certainly the case with It Happened One Night, the very first comedy among the Best Picture winners, a small-budget production that nobody expected to generate any real interest, a movie that its 2 leads didn't enjoy making, but nevertheless would write the vocabulary for nearly every romantic comedy that was to come. A simple pairing of 2 people from different worlds, stuck together in a situation from which they cannot separate. They hate each other at first, and inevitably fall desperately in love. Hello and welcome to the Best Picture winners, a full-on survey of the films Oscar-crowned the best of the year. My name's Jerry, and I'll be looking at each film from each year of the Academy's first century, and the people and events surrounding it. This time we're looking at It Happened One Night, a ribald road comedy that broke all the rules and wrote some new ones. The great persistence of American cinema is its current value. By their very nature, movies are the products of the times in which they are made, and that means that very often they land at a tricky moment either in American history or in movie history. It Happened One Night has the luxury of both. In the state of American history, it takes place very much in the whirling maelstrom of the Great Depression, but it maintains a lightness of tone. It doesn't have the blisters of movies like The Grapes of Wrath or Make Way for Tomorrow. The Depression exists, which is inevitable since this is a road picture made in 1934, but the much larger focus is on romance, gender roles, and racy sexual tension. For the state of movie history, this is a very spicy movie for its time, and time was of the essence. This was the first year of the serious induction of the Hays Code, a self-imposed industry-wide state of self-censorship, which spared the public everything from prostitution and foul language to the shocking sight of a baby's bare backside. Sex was spoken in gestures and symbols. The fact that the movie was in production before the serious undertaking of the code is part of what leaves its long-standing influence intact. We remember this as a very adult, very sexy comedy by the standards of the time, and one that would have a mass effect on romantic comedies to come. That's certainly true of the plot, and here it is. Claudette Colbert plays Ellie Andrews, a pampered poodle who runs away from her wealthy father when he demands an annulment after she has eloped with the celebrated pilot King Wesley. Dad suspects that the new husband has only married Ellie for her money, and trapped on her father's yacht, she breaks free and jumps ship, and her father issues an army of lookouts and private detectives to bring her back with a tasty reward of $10,000. Naturally, because the family is so prolific, that means that every newspaper hound from coast to coast is looking for her. On the road, and with publicity about the event breathing down her neck, Ellie boards a bus back to New York to be reunited with her husband. But fate doesn't cooperate. Her suitcase is stolen, leaving her penniless and dependent on Peter Warren, a battered-down newspaper reporter played by Clark Gable, who's just been fired after getting drunk and shooting his mouth off to his editor. Warren sees Ellie as an opportunity to repair his own damaged reputation by bringing in an exclusive. She hates his demeanor and his dismissive attitude. He looks down on her because she's a spoiled brat who won't last 5 minutes in the real world without him. And yeah, he assumes that he can't handle her herself, but I mean, she just had her suitcase stolen out from under her nose, so he's not completely wrong. He forces a deal on her. Give him the exclusive to the story, and he'll help her get back to Wesley. Naturally, they hate each other. But after a series of misadventures on the road, including a stolen car, a sexy lesson in hitchhiking, and a wise decision to share a room separated by a blanket nicknamed the Walls of Jericho, they fall inevitably in love. The two shack up in a bungalow, pretending to be a married couple, and while Ellie is asleep, Peter sneaks out and runs back to the office to sell his angry boss the story that she's done with Wesley and is going to marry him. He only needs $1,000 to get things started. Meanwhile, the proprietors of the bungalow notice that their car is missing and figure that they're skipping out on the bill. They throw Ellie out, and, thinking that Peter has bailed on her, she calls her father to tell him where to pick her up. On Ellie's wedding day, Peter arrives at the house not to collect the $10,000 reward, but to be reimbursed $39.60 for time and materials that Ellie has cost him along the way. This tips off the old man that Peter loves Ellie more than the reward. When he presses Peter to know whether he loves his daughter or not, Peter finally says,
"Yes! But don't hold that against me. I'm a little screwy myself."
While walking Ellie down the aisle, her father convinces her that Peter really does love her, and she runs away. She and Peter are married, thus permitting the breakdown of the Walls of Jericho. Given that now, in the 21st century, movies and television are permitted to give us basically any kind of sexual content without a lot of public outrage, you do have to remind yourself while watching it happen one night that this was a less permissive time. Watching it, it feels more like a leftover from the jazz era from the 1920s. This is a movie very much of its time, and it still manages to feel timeless. Think about this in context of a more repressive time. A young woman defies her father and gets married to a man he doesn't approve of. She runs off to be reunited with him, and in the process hits the road with a world-battered rogue. They spend the night together in the same bungalow. He builds the Walls of Jericho to keep a little decorum in their lodging, though he isn't shy about stripping in front of her. Later, she evens the score by using her gorgeous legs to hitch a ride. And they fall in love in spite of the fact that he is supposed to be helping her get back to the man she just married. That's pretty hot stuff for 1934. And I'm bound to think probably wouldn't have passed muster before the code if it weren't a comedy. Drama would have pushed this too close to the bone. Comedy lightens the mood and has us giggling. I also wonder what the movie might have become without public support. Despite its place in movie history today, It Happened One Night was not so lauded during its production phase. It was noted as a negligible small-budget production from Columbia Pictures, which at the time was not considered a major player in Hollywood. The screenplay was based on a short story called Night Bus that appeared in Cosmopolitan magazine in August of 1933, written by an investigative journalist named Samuel Hopkins Adams, who was known for his stories about sexually charged women in the jazz age in the 1920s. His work was considered extremely risque for the time, and fortunately, much of it made it into the film. But the story still had to be rewritten several times to make it work. That was the job of Robert Riskin, a regular collaborator with Capra who would write notable scripts for him, including Lady for a Day, Mr. Deeds Goes to Town, and the Best Picture winner of 1938, You Can't Take It With You. But political divisiveness and accusations that Capra was taking all the credit forced these two to dissolve their association by the end of the decade. Almost everyone making It Happen One Night seemed unhappy, most famously its two stars. Claudette Colbert apparently hated it. She was not the first choice to play Ellie, nor the second, nor the fifth, nor the ninth. Carole Lombard, Miriam Hopkins, Loretta Young, Margaret Sullivan, Constance Bennett, and Myrna Loy all said no. Betty Davis was busy with Of Human Bondage, which netted her a Best Actress nomination out of protest from the film community. More on that later. And Colbert had turned it down because her previous film with Capra in 1927's For the Love of Mike was an unmitigated disaster that put her in movie jail for 2 years. She hated working with the director and vowed never to work with him again. She was lured in by a $50,000 paycheck and the promise that the movie would be finished in 4 weeks. When it was all over, she reportedly told a friend, "I think I've made the worst film of my life." Apparently, she got over it because it made her career, this and Cleopatra being the two films that she is most remembered for. And apparently time gave her a reflection of what the film became, as she was all smiles 48 years later congratulating the director when he received his tribute from the American Film Institute in 1982. Gable's participation has been shrouded in Hollywood legend, based on his perceived bad behavior. It was said that the bosses at MGM lent him to Columbia as punishment either for his sexual dalliances or because he refused a role they had offered him. Apparently he showed up drunk when he met with Capra, and legend has it that he stomped onto the set the first day and grumbled, "Alright, let's get this over with." The truth is more likely a business matter than a personal one. He apparently wasn't working on anything at the time, but was netting a salary of $2,000 a week, and so studio overlord Louis B. Mayer wanted to make sure that he was working while he was getting paid. Either way, he, like Colbert, hated working on the film, and that's reflected in the rather stiff and professional manner in which he accepted his Oscar.
I do want to take this opportunity of expressing my thanks and sincere gratitude to Mr. Frank Capra, the director of It Happened One Night, and Miss Claudette Colbert, who was gracious enough to co-star with me in that same picture. Thank you.
Nobody at the time thought that the movie was working, and when it was first screened, it received a positive yet rather soft reception as it landed in major cities. When it played at Radio City Music Hall, it was about to be pulled because it didn't make enough money for a second week. But the word began to spread as it moved across the country into smaller markets, places where the Great Depression had hit the hardest, and where the film's rough-hewn nature would be most familiar. What Capra and Robert Riskin had been able to capture was the dual identity of the American cinema. On the one hand, this is a road picture that doesn't forget that hard times were still a constant at the American breakfast table. It is mostly outdone by the romance, but once in a while you can see it peeking through, as in this scene on a bus in which a young kid panics when his mother passes out because she hasn't had a solid meal in days. The duality of that is interesting, since it immediately follows a fun sing-along of the daring young man on the flying trapeze. That was important to audiences of the early 30s. This is a light romantic comedy, and audiences often used the fantasy cinema to escape the misery of what was happening in the country. It Happened One Night offered a portrait of both, the idea of two lovers struggling in a world that the audience would immediately recognize. Yet it wasn't so downtrodden as to be a constant reminder of what they had to endure when they left the theater for the gloom of the Depression. The cinema was a beacon of hope. The couple on screen were beautiful and glamorous, and pressing through a familiar landscape, all with the reassurance that love will win in the end, hard work will be a reward, and a happy ending is waiting just around the corner. And again, the movie was released at the right time, just a year before the crackdown of the Hays Office, that hard-bound exercise in good behavior put into place by the Hollywood studios in order to avoid government censorship, to restore the image of Hollywood that had been tarnished by the scandals in the 1920s, and to promote a healthy image of American social landscape by providing cleaner and more wholesome standards of living. All objectionable material had to be presented sideways, or not at all. It Happened One Night was very clever in avoiding this trap. There's some tantalizing fun in the games that Peter and Ellie are forced to play, posing as a married couple so they can share quarters, in separate beds, of course. A blanket strung up between them keeping their natural urges at bay, the famed walls of Jericho. Peter isn't afraid of stripping in front of Ellie, so long as she chooses to stand on her side, undressing from the top down, making this the first instance in an American film in which a man was seen shirtless. We're not so lucky enough to get so much from Ellie, whose change of night clothes is seen in silhouette. The next day, they throw off some nosy detectives by breaking into an impromptu play act as a feuding couple. The way they laugh it off when the coast is clear is the first genuine bonding moment that the couple have, perhaps suggesting that their marriage might include some roleplay. It's a pretty racy move for the time. There's real sexual tension between Peter and Ellie that grows and grows over the course of the film, and it breaks down in the final shot. Sex was a dominant feature of films during the 1920s and early 30s, a panoply of scandalous lifestyles with otherwise good people seduced into debauchery and personal ruin. Movies like Babyface, in which Barbara Stanwyck played a saloon keeper's daughter who sleeps her way to the top of the corporate ladder, and Red-Headed Woman, featuring Jean Harlow as a woman who breaks up a marriage in order to advance her own social standing.
Do it again, I like it. Do it again.
Both saw their lead characters as antagonists, using sex as a tool for personal gain. The difference with It Happened One Night is that it showed that sexual games could be playful and fun, not always offered through the machinations of terrible people. In that way, it might offer the most daring idea for this period, the idea that nice people like sex too. And yet, as forward-thinking as it may have been, the question remains, how does It Happen One Night play after 90 years? How does it fare in the age of wokeness and political correctness? Well, to the late generation, I suspect that it will run hot and cold. This is a movie about a sheltered and pampered poodle brought out of the protective penthouse and saddled with an old newspaper warhorse who sees her with disdain even as he's falling in love with her. The playing field is evenly matched. Both are denizens of the city and are brought together on a road adventure through the American countryside, where they're both out of their element. But in the hole that they have to dig themselves out of, a difficult love-hate relationship begins to blossom. And because the characters are written so specifically, it's hard to write them off as one-dimensional placeholders. It might have seemed easy to paint Ellie as a whining pill, a rich girl who's spoiled and can't put one foot in front of the other. But the fact that she is determined to marry King Wesley and runs off to reunite with him when confined by her father shows that she is resistant to those who want to hold her down. Out on the road, she is a babe in the woods. She has her suitcase stolen and is apparently unaware of the concept of outdoor plumbing, as she misreads a line of women waiting to use the showers. But she's not dumb. She just needs a helping hand getting over some of the rough spots. That's where Peter comes in. He's hard, he's street smart, he's stubborn. He knows how to handle himself. I love how he handles the creep who's been making moves on Ellie by pretending to be a gangster, which sends the guy running off in the other direction. He has a quick mind that very often gets him through the rough spots. But it's in Peter's approach to Ellie that the movie shows its age. His approach to her, even at the point where they should be falling in love, is sometimes a little mean-spirited. Crossing a stream, he smacks her on the behind. He talks to her like a child. And this is how he describes her to her father.
What she needs is a guy that'd take a sock at her once a day, whether it's coming to her or not.
Yeah, I know. These are different times, and it's really only a movie. But this is a love story, and I have to wonder what their marriage is going to be like, given Peter's dismissive attitude. Watching the movie again for this video, I started to wonder if Ellie wasn't better off with King Wesley. But really, we never know, because the movie never gives us a scene between the two, and we never really get an indication of why she married him outside of the fact that it's not what her father wants. But that's really a minor point. The point is to set her free and thrust her into the arms of Clark Gable. A classic pairing of two people from different worlds who despise each other so much that, by the rules of the American cinema, they have to eventually fall in love. And by the rules of Frank Capra, It Happened One Night feels like a bit of an oddity. He was a director whose films were pro-American yet anti-materialism. They tended to wear their message on their collar button. This movie, however, feels a little bit different. It's a character piece, a laid-back road picture that feels very unusual in the panoply of his work. But you can't deny its legacy. He set in motion the tenets of the screwball comedy, a genre that flourished until just after World War II, and the romantic comedy, a genre that still thrives today. In winning the Oscar, It Happened One Night was a watershed. This was the first year that the Oscars were annual rather than seasonal, and it was the first film to win the Oscar in the top 5 categories. It won Best Picture, Best Director for Capra, Best Actor for Gable, Best Actress for Colbert, and Best Adapted Screenplay for Robert Riskin. This would only happen on 2 other occasions, in 1976 with One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and in 1992 with The Silence of the Lambs. Capra was excited to win his Oscar, and he would win another one before the decade was out, and Gable barely gave his Oscar a second thought. But whatever drama befell anyone else, it paled in comparison to what happened to Claudette Colbert. The Best Actress race of 1935 was mostly a victory lap. Not for Colbert, but for Bette Davis, who had just given the single greatest performance of her career as Mildred Rogers in Of Human Bondage, adapted by John Cromwell, James Cromwell's dad. The movie was being produced at RKO, but Davis was under contract with Warner Brothers, making pictures of little to no distinction. When she read the book, she wanted the role very badly, but studio head Jack Warner refused to lend her to RKO, feeling that playing such an evil slattern would tarnish her image. It was the same reason that Katharine Hepburn and Irene Dunne had turned it down. Based on the book by W. Somerset Maugham, it was not glamorous. Mildred is a Cockney waitress whose sociopathic behavior destroys the life of a club-footed artist, played in the film by Leslie Howard. And despite all objections, Davis gave the performance of her life, one that would make her a star. Critics loved her work, as did the film community and filmgoers, and in this, everyone in Hollywood was certain that she would win the Oscar for Best Actress. But to everyone's horror, she wasn't even nominated. That outrage led many in the Hollywood community to issue a write-in campaign to get her on the ballot. It worked, and she still lost, coming in third behind Norma Shearer in The Barretts of Wimpole Street, and the winner Claudette Colbert, who was so sure that Davis would win that she didn't even show up at the ceremony. This act of defiance would change the Academy's voting practices. From this point on, there would be no more write-ins, and the votes would be tallied by the accounting firm of Price Waterhouse. On Oscar night, however, when Colbert did win, Leroy Johnston, a member of the Academy's press committee, was dispatched to the Los Angeles train station to get her. She was about to board the 20th Century bound from New York, and told Johnston that she didn't want to go because she'd miss her train, and she didn't want to show up at the Oscars in traveling clothes. He managed to convince her that this was the Nobel Prize of Motion Pictures, and she went back with him. That night, she and Gable picked up what would be the only Oscars of their career. Davis, meanwhile, would win the next 2 years in a row. First for Alfred Green's Dangerous, and then for basically playing Scarlett O'Hara by another name in William Wyler's Jezebel. In the crucible of what should have been Bette Davis's night, the Oscars belonged to It Happened One Night, nominated among a group of nominees that maybe didn't seem to come from the same planet. They included Sidney Franklin's The Barretts of Wimpole Street, based on the hit play about the romance between Elizabeth Barrett and Robert Browning. There was Cecil B. DeMille's racy historical drama Cleopatra, featuring another great performance from Claudette Colbert. Frank Berzage's Flirtation Walk, billed as a military musical, all about a private who falls in love with the general's daughter. Also, Astaire and Rogers' second feature, The Gay Divorcee, which featured the song The Continental, which won the first Oscar for Best Original Song. Here Comes the Navy was a vanilla romantic comedy starring James Cagney and Gloria Stewart, and is notable only because it was filmed aboard the USS Arizona, which was sunk during the bombing of Pearl Harbor in 1941. The House of Rothschild was an adaptation of a play that starred George Arliss, Loretta Young, and Boris Karloff in a chronicle of the Rothschild bankers, and believe me, it's about as exciting as it sounds. Much better was John Stahl's terrific adaptation of Imitation of Life, featuring yet another great performance by Claudette Colbert, a melodrama about racial identity that was very forward-thinking for its time. There was One Night of Love, a drippy romantic musical set in the opera world, and was only really nominated because of an innovation in sound technology that got it a special Oscar. The Thin Man, based on the book by Dashiell Hammett, that would spin off into a successful series. Viva Villa, a David O. Selznick production that starred Wallace Beery as Pancho Villa, and featured maybe the most racist movie poster of the year. And finally, The White Parade, directed by Irving Cumming and starring Loretta Young, and concerning the travails of a group of young women trying to become nurses. This one is notable in that it's been teetering on the edge of being lost, and because of its damaged print, it has never been released in home video, and what remains is currently housed at the UCLA archive. Being that this was the last year before their production code took its stranglehold, 1934 was a great year for films that walked the tightrope of good taste and forward thinking. My favorites among the nominees, of course, were It Happened One Night and Imitation of Life and The Thin Man, but there were a few great pictures that didn't even get a mention from the Academy. I love Tarzan and His Mate, the second Tarzan adventure starring Johnny Weissmuller and directed by Cedric Gibbons, who had a small role in last year's Best Picture winner Grand Hotel. I like the aforementioned Of Human Bondage. I liked It's a Gift, one of 5 films released in 1934 starring W.C. Field. I liked Belle of the 90s, written by and starring Mae West, which was less received than her previous films, but I still like it. There was Hitchcock's The Man Who Knew Too Much, which, despite vast differences, I like better than the remake. There was Howard Hawks' screwball comedy 20th Century. There was the horror classic The Black Cat, starring the dynamic duo Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi. There was the Laurel and Hardy confection, Babes in Toyland, which is miles better than any remake. There's the wonderful Death Takes a Holiday, starring Friedrich March as the title character, who comes down to Earth to figure out why people fear him and ends up falling in love. And the best of the lot, the original version of Ozu's Story of Floating Weeds. But of all these wonderful films, my favorite movie of 1934 is Jean Vigo's La Talente. Not because it's regarded as a masterpiece, but because it's a film that haunts me. I saw it a dozen years ago, and it has stayed on my mind ever since. A strange, almost surreal examination of a newlywed couple that is told in such simplistic terms, but in such intricate detail, and with such a strange orientation, that you might imagine that in other hands it might have been a comedy. It's the story of a bride named Juliet, played by German actress Dita Parlo, and her groom Jean, played by Michel Simon, who get married and immediately move aboard his leaky canal barge, where she is forced to contend with his shipmate, a cabin boy, and 6 cats that frankly she doesn't like. Again, this sounds like the makings of a comedy, but it's not. It's a very engrossing, almost surrealistic view of the realities of marriage, not the sweeping overviews in the usual movie terms, but in the intricate details, what 2 people, now locked in holy matrimony, must overcome in order to be a couple, and to be able to bear living together. As a married man myself for nearly 2 decades, I didn't so much identify on a practical level as on an emotional and symbolic one. Vigo's career was tragically cut short by an early death from tuberculosis at the age of only 29. He was working on the film from a stretcher as he was dying. I haven't seen his other films, but I can say of this one, it had me thinking about it for a very long time. It's the kind of movie that comes to you like a dream, and you put it together in your own mind rather than being led by the hand. I like that about it. In a weird sense, La La Land is kind of the logical extension of It Happened One Night. If that film ended with a honeymoon, La La Land begins as the honeymoon is ending, and the realities of sharing your space with another person are beginning to take shape. It helps that it's symbolized by the cramped spaces on that boat, the tight fit the newlyweds have to endure. I love this movie for everything that it is, for its dreamlike quality, for its realities, for what it made me think about it. Its spaces let me interpret what was happening. It's a very thought-provoking film that stays with you long after it's over. It breaks down the walls of Jericho in your mind and in your heart. For Armchair Cinema, I'm Jerry Dean Roberts. I'll see you next time.